Listen carefully, because the most important thing about your past relationship may have nothing to do with whether your ex comes back. It may have everything to do with what happens inside you when you finally stop looking at your past through the eyes of the person who hurt you. There is a psychological pattern that happens after emotional separation. When someone leaves, rejects us, disappoints us, or suddenly becomes distant, the mind begins searching for an explanation. Why did they do it? Did they ever love me? Do they regret it? Are they thinking about me? Will they come back? And without realizing it, we can become prisoners of questions that have no immediate answers. But here's where everything changes. The moment you stop making their behavior the center of your emotional world, you begin taking your power back. Maybe your ex doesn't want you to hear a message like this because it challenges the story you've been carrying. Maybe you have believed that you were the one who lost something. Maybe you thought they moved on while you were left behind. But what if the separation wasn't proof that you were unworthy? What if it exposed something you needed to understand about yourself, your boundaries, your emotional patterns, and the kind of love you are willing to accept? Think about how powerful that shift is. You stop asking, why didn't they choose me? And begin asking, why was I willing to abandon myself just to be chosen? That is a completely different question. And powerful questions create powerful changes. Sometimes we romanticize people because we are remembering the emotional intensity rather than the complete reality. We remember the late-night conversations, the chemistry, the laughter, the moments when everything felt perfect, but we conveniently forget the confusion, inconsistency, anxiety, disrespect, or emotional distance that existed alongside those beautiful moments. The mind does this because it dislikes unfinished stories. It wants closure. It wants a final conversation that explains everything. It wants the other person to admit, I was wrong, I lost someone valuable, I should have treated you differently. But you cannot build your future around waiting for someone else to validate your past. Your healing begins when you realize that closure is not always a conversation. Sometimes closure is a decision to stop checking, a decision to stop chasing, a decision to stop interpreting every song, message, silence, or coincidence as evidence that they are secretly coming back. And most importantly, a decision to stop measuring your worth by someone's ability to recognize it. Now, does that mean your ex never thinks about you? No. Does it mean people never regret their decisions? Of course not. Human beings are complicated. People can miss someone and still remain silent. They can regret their choices and still lack the courage to change. They can love someone and still be incapable of giving that person the relationship they deserve. That distinction matters, because love alone is not always enough. Compatibility matters, character matters, emotional maturity matters, consistency matters. And your future deserves more than chemistry without stability. So if your soulmate ex is somewhere thinking about you, regretting something, or wondering whether you've moved on, let them wonder. Your responsibility is not to decode their thoughts. Your responsibility is to build your life. Because the greatest transformation happens when you stop waiting for someone from your past to tell you that you were valuable and start living as though you already know it. Don't chase the person who walked away. Become the person they can no longer define. Your past can explain you, but it does not get to control you. There is a moment after heartbreak that almost nobody talks about. It is the moment when you realize that the person you lost is not the only thing that changed. You changed too. And sometimes that transformation is so profound that the person from your past would barely recognize you. Think about who you were when that relationship began. Maybe you were more willing to compromise. Maybe you tolerated things you would never tolerate today. Maybe you needed their attention to feel secure. Maybe you constantly explained yourself because you were afraid that if you stopped trying, they would leave. And perhaps that was the version of you they became comfortable with. But life has a strange way of rebuilding people through what breaks them. Pain can become a teacher when you refuse to let it become your identity. After the relationship ended, you may have gone through a period where everything felt empty. You wondered why they could move forward while you were still carrying the memories. You replayed conversations, you analyzed their behavior, you asked yourself what you could have done differently. But slowly, something began happening beneath the surface. You started becoming more independent. You became more aware of your boundaries. You stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You began recognizing the difference between attention and genuine love. And perhaps most importantly, you discovered that peace feels different from emotional chaos. That's growth. And here's the psychological truth. People often struggle to update their perception of someone they once knew intimately. They remember the old version. They remember your reactions, your insecurities, your availability, your patterns. They may assume that if they returned, they would find the same person waiting in the same emotional position. But what happens when they don't? What happens when the person they left behind no longer needs their approval? What happens when you don't react the way you used to? What happens when they realize that the door they once walked through is no longer open simply because they decide to knock? That's when the entire dynamic changes. And this is where you need wisdom. Do not transform yourself just to make an ex regret losing you. That's still giving them control. Don't become successful so they will see your success. Don't become attractive so they will notice you. Don't become emotionally strong so they will come running back. Become stronger because you deserve to live differently. There is a massive difference between transformation motivated by revenge and transformation motivated by purpose. Revenge says, one day they'll see what they lost. Purpose says, I don't need them to see it. I see it. That is freedom. Maybe your ex will notice your transformation. Maybe they won't. Maybe they will regret their choices. Maybe they will never admit it. But none of those outcomes should determine whether your growth was worth it. Because the greatest victory after heartbreak isn't getting the person back, it's getting yourself back. You recover the confidence you surrendered. You recover the dreams you postponed. You recover the standards you lowered. You recover the peace you sacrificed trying to maintain a relationship that was no longer healthy. And eventually, you reach a point where you can remember the relationship without needing to return to it. That's maturity. You can appreciate what was beautiful without pretending everything was healthy. You can forgive someone without giving them access to you again. You can love someone from a distance without abandoning your future. And if that person ever comes back, you will not meet them from desperation. You will meet them from discernment. You won't ask, how badly do I want them? You'll ask, does this relationship belong in the life I've worked so hard to build? That question can change everything. So don't worry about whether your soulmate ex recognizes the new you. Build the new you so completely that you no longer need recognition from anyone. The person they lost is not the person you are becoming. And your greatest transformation begins when you stop looking backward to prove it. There is another part of heartbreak that is easy to misunderstand. It is the silence that comes after someone has hurt you. You look at that silence and assume it means they don't care. You assume that if they were truly sorry, they would call, apologize, explain themselves, or come running back. But human beings don't always behave according to what they feel. Sometimes pride is louder than regret. Sometimes fear is stronger than love. Sometimes a person knows exactly what they did wrong but doesn't have the emotional maturity to face it. And that's why silence should never automatically be interpreted as indifference. Think about what happens when someone makes a decision they later regret. At first, the mind protects itself. It creates explanations. It was for the best. We weren't compatible. They'll be fine. I had no choice. These stories allow a person to move forward without confronting the emotional consequences of their actions. But time has a way of removing those defenses. When the emotional intensity disappears, reality becomes clearer. The person who once seemed replaceable may suddenly become difficult to forget. The conversations they took for granted become memories. The consistency they once ignored becomes something they miss. The presence they assumed would always be available becomes an absence they cannot easily replace. And this is where regret can begin. But regret is not always dramatic. Sometimes regret looks like quietly checking someone's social media, Sometimes it looks like remembering an old conversation. Sometimes it appears when a new relationship doesn't feel the same. Sometimes it is simply the realization that the person they thought would always be there has genuinely moved forward. But listen carefully. Someone regretting losing you does not automatically mean they are ready to love you correctly. That distinction is incredibly important. We often confuse regret with transformation. They are not the same thing. A person can regret losing you and still repeat the same behavior. They can miss you and still be emotionally unavailable. They can recognize your value and still lack the character necessary to build a healthy relationship. So don't build your future around the possibility of someone's regret. Build it around evidence of growth. If someone returns, don't listen only to what they say. Watch what they consistently do. Words can create emotional excitement. Actions create trust. If they say, "I've changed," ask yourself, what has actually changed? Are they more accountable? Are they more consistent? Do they respect boundaries? Can they communicate without manipulation? Can they acknowledge the pain they caused without turning themselves into the victim? Can they take responsibility without demanding immediate forgiveness? Those questions matter far more than, do they still love me? Because love without maturity can become another form of pain. And perhaps this is the lesson your past relationship was trying to teach you. You don't need someone to suffer without you in order for your pain to have mattered. You don't need them to regret losing you in order to prove that you are valuable. You don't need an apology to begin healing. And you certainly don't need their return to validate your decision to move forward. Your worth existed before they recognized it. Your worth remains if they forget it. And your worth remains if they come back tomorrow. That is the foundation of emotional freedom. Maybe one day they will finally understand what they lost. Maybe they will look back and recognize the person who loved them sincerely. Maybe they will wish they had handled things differently. But by then, your responsibility will be the same. Protect your peace, honor your growth, and never confuse someone's regret with your destiny. Because sometimes the greatest proof that you've healed is not that they finally come back. It's that you no longer need them to. Maybe the hardest question after a painful relationship is this: why did God allow it to happen? Why did you meet them if the relationship was going to end? Why did you feel such a powerful connection if you were eventually going to experience separation? Why would something that felt so meaningful become something that caused so much pain? We naturally assume that if something was painful, it must have been pointless. But pain and purpose can exist in the same story. Sometimes you don't understand the meaning of a season while you're standing inside it. You only understand it after you've walked through it and looked back. Think about what that relationship revealed about you. Maybe before them, you didn't know how deeply you could love. Maybe you didn't understand your own emotional patterns. Maybe you had never confronted your fear of abandonment, your need for validation, or your tendency to give more than you received. And then the relationship exposed all of it. Not because you were being punished, but because what remains hidden cannot be transformed. There are parts of ourselves we never discover when everything is comfortable. Pressure reveals character. Disappointment reveals attachment. Loss reveals what we were depending on for our identity. And sometimes God uses a closed door to force us to stop standing in front of it. You may have spent months asking for the relationship to be restored, while life was quietly teaching you how to restore yourself. That's a profound difference. We often pray, "God, bring this person back." But perhaps the deeper prayer is, "God, make me capable of recognizing what is truly meant for me." Because if you receive the relationship you want without becoming the person capable of sustaining a healthy version of it, you can lose it all over again. That's why separation can become preparation. It can teach you patience. It can teach you boundaries. It can teach you discernment. It can teach you that chemistry is not the same as compatibility. And it can teach you that love should never require you to destroy your dignity just to keep another person close. Maybe your ex was part of your story, but that doesn't necessarily mean they were supposed to be the conclusion. There is a dangerous mistake people make with the word soulmate. They assume that if someone feels intensely familiar, emotionally powerful, or spiritually significant, that person must automatically belong in their future. Not necessarily. Some people enter your life to build with you, some enter to challenge you, some enter to reveal something, some enter for a season and leave a lesson that remains long after they are gone. The significance of a relationship is not always measured by how long it lasts. Sometimes its significance is measured by who you became because you experienced it. And that changes the way you look at your past. Instead of saying, "They ruined my life," you can eventually say, "That experience taught me what I will never compromise again." Instead of saying, "I lost them," you can say, "I found parts of myself I had abandoned." Instead of asking, "Why wasn't I chosen?" you can ask, "What is God preparing me to recognize when the right opportunity appears?" That is where faith becomes practical. Faith isn't pretending that everything that happens is easy. Faith is trusting that your future does not have to be controlled by your past. So if you're still grieving someone, don't shame yourself for having loved them. Honor the lesson. If you're still confused, give yourself permission not to have every answer today. If they return someday, let wisdom, not loneliness, decide what happens next. And if they never return, understand this. Their absence does not mean your story ended. It may mean a chapter ended, and chapters end because books continue. So stop asking only why God allowed them to leave. Start asking what this season is building inside you. Sometimes God doesn't remove the person because your story is over. Sometimes He removes the attachment because your next chapter requires a stronger you. There comes a moment when the past finally realizes something it never expected. You are no longer waiting. And that moment can change everything. For a long time, your ex may have been accustomed to a certain version of you. The version who answered quickly. The version who explained everything. The version who kept the door open. The version who secretly hoped that one message, one apology, or one unexpected appearance would restore everything. But healing changes your behavior. You stop checking whether they viewed your story. You stop wondering why they haven't called. You stop creating imaginary conversations in your head. You stop asking mutual friends about them. And eventually, you stop organizing your future around the possibility that they might return. That's when they may realize that your emotional availability is no longer guaranteed. Psychologically, this can be a powerful shift because people often recognize the value of something differently once they no longer have easy access to it. Familiarity can create the illusion that something will always be there. When that assumption disappears, perception changes. But be careful here. Your goal is not to make your ex chase you. Your goal is not to create jealousy. Your goal is not to disappear so they will panic. Those are still forms of attachment because you're continuing to organize your behavior around their reaction. Real freedom is different. Real freedom says, "I'm moving forward whether you notice or not." That's the moment you become difficult to manipulate. Not because you become cold, but because you become grounded. You no longer need to prove that you're happy. You simply become happier. You don't need to show them that you've changed. You live differently. You don't need to announce that you've moved on. Your decisions demonstrate it. And that is powerful because genuine transformation doesn't need an audience. Imagine someone who once believed they could return to your life whenever they wanted. Then one day they realize that you have developed standards they cannot casually cross. You don't respond to breadcrumbs. You don't confuse nostalgia with compatibility. You don't treat loneliness as evidence that you belong together. You don't allow one emotional conversation to erase months or years of patterns. You have learned to pause, and that pause is maturity. Because when emotions are intense, the brain wants immediate relief. It wants the familiar person, the familiar voice, the familiar connection. But familiarity isn't always safety. Sometimes we miss people simply because our nervous system recognizes them. That doesn't automatically mean they are good for our future. This is why you must separate emotional intensity from genuine alignment. If your ex returns, don't ask only, "Do I still have feelings?" Ask better questions. What has actually changed? Why did the relationship fail before? Are those conditions different now? Can we communicate differently? Can trust realistically be rebuilt? Are we both choosing each other from strength, or are we simply afraid of being alone? These questions protect you from repeating history, because getting someone back is easy compared with building something healthy with them. Anyone can apologize in an emotional moment. Real change is measured over time. Anyone can say, "I miss you." But consistency answers whether they are ready. Anyone can promise, "It will be different." But behavior proves whether it actually is, and perhaps the greatest sign of your transformation is that you no longer need the answer to be yes. You can love someone and still say no. You can forgive someone and still maintain distance. You can remember the good and still refuse to return to the unhealthy. You can acknowledge that someone mattered without allowing them to determine what happens next. That is emotional sovereignty. So if your ex ever realizes that they no longer have the same place in your life, don't celebrate because they finally noticed. Celebrate because you finally noticed yourself. You noticed your value. You noticed your boundaries. You noticed your potential. You noticed how much of your life had been spent waiting for someone else to make a decision that you were always capable of making yourself. And that decision is simple. Move forward. If someone wants to walk beside you, let their actions prove that they can. But never stop walking simply because someone from your past has finally decided to look back. Your future should never be held hostage by someone who only recognized your value after losing access to you.